They found the letter 60 years later, tucked inside a hollowed-out brick in what remained of a burned chapel outside Caen, France. The paper had yellowed, the ink faded to ghost traces, but the words still carried the weight of a promise made in the darkest hour. The letter began, "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I've kept my word." June 5, 1944, the night before D-Day, American paratroopers huddled in the belly of C-47 transport planes, their faces painted with determination and terror in equal measure. Among them sat James Thornton, a 22-year-old farm boy from Iowa, clutching a photograph of a British nurse he'd met 3 months earlier in a London hospital. Her name was Sarah Webb. She'd patched up his broken ribs after a training accident, and while her hands worked with professional efficiency, her voice carried something else entirely, a warmth that made him forget, just for a moment, that the world was tearing itself apart. "You Americans," she'd said with a tired smile, "always in such a hurry to be heroes." "And you British," he'd replied, "always pretending you're not." They'd stolen hours together in the chaos of wartime London, walking through blacked-out streets, sharing tin cups of weak tea, talking about the farm he'd returned to, the hospital where she'd work, the children they might have, the life they'd build when the madness ended. But on June 4th, the day before the invasion, James received devastating news. Sarah's hospital in Southampton had been hit by a V-1 rocket. Casualties were catastrophic. No survivors list had been posted yet. His commanding officer found him sitting alone, head in his hands. "Thornton, I'm sorry, but we jump tomorrow. I need you focused." James looked up, his eyes red but clear. "I'll jump, sir, but I need to make a stop first." What happened next would become legend in his unit. Against direct orders, James slipped away that evening, hitchhiked 40 miles to the ruined hospital, and spent 3 hours digging through rubble with his bare hands while bombs fell in the distance. He found her in a basement shelter, alive, covered in dust, helping wounded civilians. When she saw him, filthy and bleeding, she started to cry. "You fool, you beautiful, reckless fool." They had 20 minutes together before military police came to drag him back, 20 minutes to say everything and nothing. "I'll come back," he promised. "I don't care what I have to survive, I'll come back to you." She pressed something into his hand, a small silver locket with her picture inside. "Then you'd better keep this safe." The next night, James jumped into Normandy with the 101st Airborne. His plane was hit before they reached the drop zone. 17 men aboard, only 9 made it out. James landed 3 miles from his objective, alone in the darkness, with machine gun fire tearing through the hedgerows. He'd lost his rifle in the jump. He had a pistol, 2 grenades, and Sarah's locket. For 3 days he fought his way inland. He joined scattered groups of lost paratroopers, British commandos, Canadian infantry. They liberated villages. They took casualties. They kept pushing forward because the alternative was unthinkable. On the 4th day, outside Caen, his unit was pinned down by a German machine gun nest in a stone chapel. Men were dying. The advance was stalled. Someone had to flank the position. James volunteered. He moved through a burning orchard using smoke for cover. A bullet grazed his helmet, another tore through his jacket. He got close enough to throw his grenades. The machine gun went silent, but as he stood to signal the all clear, a sniper's bullet found him. His commanding officer reached him first. James was conscious, barely, bleeding heavily. He pulled out paper and a pencil stub. "Write this down," he whispered, "for Sarah Webb, Southampton." With shaking hands, the officer wrote as James dictated, "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I've kept my word. I made it to France. I did my part. I thought about you every single moment. I thought about our farm, our children, our life. I'm sorry I won't be there to build it with you, But knowing you existed, knowing that someone like you was in this world, that was enough to make everything worth it. You were my reason. You made me brave. Live the life we dreamed about. Find happiness. Find love. And sometimes, when you're old and gray, remember the American soldier who loved you more than he loved his own life. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm coming home to you, just not the way we planned. Wait for me. Yours forever, James. The officer folded the letter and tucked it into a hollow brick in the chapel wall. I'll make sure she gets this, he promised. But in the chaos of war, he was killed 2 days later. The letter stayed hidden. But here's what the letter couldn't tell her. James didn't die that day. A British medic working frantically through wounded scattered across the battlefield found him unconscious but alive. They evacuated him to a field hospital, then to England, then to a recovery facility. But the bullet had damaged his spine. He was paralyzed from the waist down. For months he was listed as missing, then presumed dead. By the time the army corrected their records, James refused to contact Sarah. "Look at me," he told the chaplain. "I promised her a life. I can't give her this." "Let her decide," the chaplain urged. But James was stubborn. He convinced himself it would be cruelty, not love, to burden her with his broken body. He returned to Iowa alone and spent 50 years running his family's farm from a wheelchair, never marrying, never forgetting. Sarah waited 2 years for him. She visited military offices, wrote letters, searched lists of casualties and prisoners of war. Finally, heartbroken, she accepted that he was gone. She eventually married a kind doctor. She had 3 children. She lived a good life, but she kept a small silver locket, the matching one to the one that James had carried, in her jewelry box, and sometimes she'd open it and wonder what might have been. In 2004, a French historian renovating the old chapel found the letter. It took him months to trace Sarah's family. She'd passed away in 1998, but her daughter was still alive. The daughter wept when she read it. She said, "Mother never stopped talking about an American soldier. She said she made her believe in miracles." The historian had one more piece of news. James Thornton was still alive, 92 years old, in a nursing home in Iowa. Sarah's daughter flew across the Atlantic. When she arrived at the nursing home, James was sitting by a window staring out at fields he could no longer walk through. She approached slowly and said, "Mr. Thornton, my name is Elizabeth. My mother was Sarah Webb." James turned, and for the first time in 60 years, tears streamed down his weathered face. She handed him the letter. "You kept your word," she said. "You came back to her in every way that mattered." James held the yellowed paper with trembling hands and said, Was her life happy?" "Very," Elizabeth said. "She had a beautiful family, a full life, but she never forgot you. She said she taught her what love really was, not just wanting someone for yourself, but wanting them to survive, to be happy, to live. She understood why you stayed away, and she forgave you. She wanted you to know that." From her bag, Elizabeth pulled out Sarah's matching locket. Inside was James's picture, the one taken before D-Day. "She kept this her entire life," Elizabeth said, pressing it into his palm. "She wanted you to have it back. She wanted you to know that you weren't forgotten, that what you did mattered, that your love mattered." James held both lockets, one in each hand, and for the first time since 1944, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the sacrifice had been worth it. He died 3 months later, peacefully, holding those lockets. At his funeral, attended by family he'd kept at arm's length for decades, Elizabeth read from Sarah's diary, an entry from 1946. "I choose to believe James is alive somewhere, happy, living the life we dreamed about. I choose to believe that love doesn't die just because people do. I choose to believe that somewhere, in some way, we'll find each other again. And if we don't, if this is all there is, then I'm grateful anyway, because he existed, because for a brief, shining moment I knew what it was like to be loved that completely, and that's more than most people ever get. The letter is now in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Below it is a placard that reads, "This letter was never delivered, but its promise was kept. James Thornton survived D-Day and lived 60 more years. Sarah Webb married, had children, and lived a full life. They never reunited, yet their love story reminds us that the greatest acts of courage aren't always on the battlefield.